start recording as well, just so everyone's aware this session will be recorded today. So thanks so much for joining, everyone. My name is Christy Walkuski. It's an interesting Monday on campus. We've had some strange Mondays leading up to today we had Cyber Attack Monday, Snow Day Monday. So it's good to be together and be starting our week together. I'm Christy Walkuski. I'm director of the Brain Center. My colleague Julie Robinson is also here. You'll hear from her a little bit later. And I'm thrilled to welcome each of you to the first session of our spring Civic LEAD Series. For those of you that this is your first time joining us, we're thrilled to have you. But I recognize many of the names here and know that many of you have been logging in with us since last July when the series began. As you'll remember, this series was created during a summer of disturbing violence and police brutality, which has sparked renewed momentum for the ongoing movement for racial justice in this country. At that time, we wanted to provide a space within our campus community to foster dialogue, to build connections during a time that, as we know, has been incredibly isolating and divisive, and to learn from the wealth of expertise and personal experience that we each bring to our BW community. So if you're interested, you can find recordings of our previous 15 sessions at bw.edu/civic, as well as on our Brain Center YouTube channel. So for those of you that are new, I'll go over kind of our virtual event etiquette. Everyone will remain muted during the presentation, but please feel free to throw your questions in the chat box, and we will have time. Dr. Keiber, remind me if I'm wrong, but we'll have time at the end for questions and answers and discussion. So this session, as I mentioned, will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel. Finally, a good reminder that this event, as all of our events, will be rooted in the expectations established by BW's community standards of conduct. So we expect this to be a space where we can engage empathetically, respectfully, and thoughtfully together. So our spring series begins with an exploration of another threat facing our campus, our community, and our country. I'm just going to read a brief quote from the Chronicle of Higher Ed, referring to the attack on the Capitol that happened on January 6th. The Chronicle says, while most Americans don't hew to the paranoid theories that prompted the insurgency, the world that spawned them is deeply affecting our students. Disinformation and propaganda are flourishing, traditional sources of authority are under siege, and people are increasingly living in polarized, politically polarized media ecosystems. So I am thrilled to introduce our host for today's session, who's going to help us start to unpack some of this. Dr. Jason Keiber comes from the Department of Political and Global Citizenship, where he provides expertise in international studies and national security programs. So Dr. Keiber will be exploring issues of white supremacy, conspiracy theories, and the future of domestic terrorism that we face here in the U.S. And impacts here on campus as well. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Keiber, and thank you so much for being here.
All right. Hi, everybody. My voice is starting to go, so hopefully I have a little bit more gas in the tank here. Let me share my presentation, and hopefully this will... All right. I believe it's working now. Is that right?
Yep, looks great.
Okay. So this is an image from a show, Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and one of the characters here is it's a comedy, and he's gone off the deep end. This image you might find people using on Twitter to suggest, you know, they've figured out a conspiracy in a jokey way. To start, just what is a conspiracy theory? Most definitions, you get something like this. They're an explanation of an impactful or complicated set of events, which posit the responsibility of a group of sinister individuals that are plotting in secret. There's a whole literature on conspiracy theories and why people believe in them, the consequences of them, etc. But for the purposes of this presentation, I want to focus on two that I think are particularly relevant to radical groups, white supremacists. That it's a palliative for existential anxiety.
Jason, you're breaking up a little bit. I wonder if you turn off your video, if that would improve the connection.
Let me try.
Sorry.
That's fine.
Are you there, Dr. Kyber? I think we lost your audio.
I am here. I'm
Okay.
trying to find the controls. My computer's not being responsive. Oh, here we go. Let's try this.
And you sound good now, so.
Okay, well, let me know if... so is my presentation still showing up?
Yep, I see your presentation and I can hear you again, so that's
Okay.
good.
So the question, why do people believe them? Well, first, or subconsciously, it's a palliative for existential anxiety. There might be some concerns about like a complicated world or a complicated series of events that's creating anxiety in the individual. And the conspiracy theory helps them sort of make sense of it, and helps them process what's happening. But it can also fulfill social needs and make you feel special, because part of the conspiracy theory is that the individuals are plotting in secret and you happen to know what's really going on. Like you're on to the conspiracy. So it provides this sense of like, you're in the in club, you're in the priesthood that really knows the truth. And with that comes also community building. That the folks that are unpacking the conspiracy theory, figuring it out, are part of this special club. So a couple of groups of concern here are anti-government groups. And to be clear, not all of these groups are white supremacist groups. Not all these groups are terrorist groups. But it's important to sort of identify some of the different groups involved, because they do have different factions or different members within them that are willing to go that extra step and use violence against innocent people for their political purposes, which is terrorism. Anti-government groups, real quick, back to conspiracy theorizing, excuse me. Part of the conspiracy theorizing is that nothing happens by accident. Nothing is what it seems. Everything is connected. The truth is hidden. And part of what makes conspiracy theorizing really frustrating for people that want to engage in dialogue with conspiracy theorists is that they are non-falsifiable. That is to say, there's no bit of evidence that you could show conspiracy theorists that will get them to say, oh, okay, now I'm convinced. There's always some sort of explanation for the truth that they're being shown at the moment. So that makes it impenetrable and unalterable. Groups of concern, anti-government groups. Here, the conspiracies revolve around US government overreach. So the common concerns here is that the United States government is after our guns, that gun confiscation will be part of the plot by the government. Eventual control by the United Nations. This is like a new world order that the UN will somehow be imposing its will upon the United States sovereignty. That there are FEMA camps that are being developed across the United States for purposes of interning, like basically acting as internment camps for US citizens. A belief in false flag operations. That is to say, there might be like like a mass casualty shooting event. And the conspiracy theorizing would be that it's really a false flag operation perpetrated by the US government that could later give the United States cover for taking away all of our guns. One group that is receiving a lot of media attention now is the Oath Keepers. It's like a large, loose collection of militia groups across the country. And again, they believe that the government has been co-opted by folks that want to install like a government tyranny, stripping Americans of their rights. They focus on recruiting from law enforcement, current and former military types, and they've been in the news recently because of the 230 people charged so far in the January 6th insurrection attempt in DC. 26 of those were either affiliated with the Oath Keepers or with the Proud Boys. So part of the Justice Department's case right now involves Oath Keepers, and they're being charged with conspiracy. Another group here, really relevant to our discussion today, white nationalist groups. Broadly speaking, their conspiracies revolve around a concern about the displacement of white culture and the replacement of the white race. They believe that white identity is sort of what's special about Western civilization, and that Western civilization itself is unique and special and should be preserved domestically. They are concerned about demographic shifts in the United States. This is the so-called replacement, great replacement, that the white race will be replaced by minority populations. So here they're hyper concerned about immigration trends, very against multiculturalism, miscegenation, stuff like that. And then we have QAnon, and it's really hard to sum up this group because it is all over the map. I've seen a couple of funny interviews of multiple QAnon folks at the same time, and they'll end up arguing with one another about the nature of QAnon. But it usually involves a conspiracy that there's a deep state that is trying to undermine what was Donald Trump's administration, and that the deep state is part of this sort of global cabal of elites, mostly Democrats, Hollywood types, that run pedophile rings and enrich themselves at the expense of everybody else. So it's really a hodgepodge of different beliefs. Here's an image of one of FEMA's smart guillotines that are apparently being distributed to FEMA internment camps around the country. Just to be clear, this is not happening. This is not really a thing, but this is the type of stuff that gets circulated online. Another conspiracy that's out there is COVID-19 is really a hoax, and that 5G, this is the emerging telecommunications standard that we'll be connecting to on our smartphones soon, that 5G is really causing us to be sick. The Nashville Bomber from Christmas, as far as I know, the latest on this is that he might have been motivated by this conspiracy. I'm pointing off screen because that's where I'm seeing my presentation. And he might have been motivated by this concern, and his bomb was placed outside of the AT&T building there in Nashville. Here is what's called a Q drop from Q of the QAnon conspiracy theorizing. So this individual, Q, leaves these messages periodically for individuals, the anons, to read and dissect and gain inspiration from. So this is from 2018. And you can see it's cryptic. From sea to shining sea, who does Huber report to directly? Huber is an FBI agent that was in charge of investigating whether or not there's FBI overreach in investigating Trump. To find evidence, who has the server, blah, blah. POTUS does not speculate. Future proves past. Who has it all? Think Twitter. Those awake see, those asleep blind. Panic, silence is golden. There's all these like cryptic messages. And part of the appeal here for the anons that follow this is that they are the investigators. They get to determine like, what is the meaning here? And I get to investigate and reveal this, and I'll share my theories with all my friends. It's kind of like a game. And it provides this community spirit for those that participate. And they're in the process of unraveling the truth. One other thing that a lot of these groups have is this sort of jokey language and a lot of memes, a lot of imagery that comes with their posts on social media and whatnot. That makes it very difficult for an outsider, just a casual observer, to really understand what's happening. Like, there'll be sort of jokes, a lot of tongue-in-cheek type images and language, and it leaves the uninitiated thinking like, oh, this seems like silly and fun. And it might like lure folks in, because who doesn't like good, irreverent internet humor? It also provides something of a smokescreen to use against critics. So if critics come at a group posting like a white supremacy meme, the response could be, oh, we're just kidding. So it sort of does this strange rhetorical function of like inviting you in, but also deflecting criticism. And what I told my students after the Christchurch shooting, where I forget how many folks were killed, but the guy that went into mosques in New Zealand, shooting and videotaping the assault, is like a lot of, so his manifesto had a lot of these jokes and these references, full of memes. And what I told my students was, a lot of you are being exposed to this stuff and you don't even know it. Like, you don't know that they're like this close to the more virulent, racist, misogynistic, anti-Semitic groups online. So there are overlaps here between these groups. And it's really important to emphasize that each subset here that I've outlined are very diverse in terms of their belief systems, their ideologies, their membership, etc. So there are anti-government groups, these would be like far-right groups, right, that are vehemently anti-racist, that they want people of color in their ranks, and they'll show up at rallies, and right across the street from them will be some other anti-government militia group, and they'll have an argument. So there are divisions within these camps here. But what's really concerning is when there's overlap, especially with the white supremacist groups. And I added here, you can tell I'm not good at making Venn diagrams. I added here this large reservoir of folks that believe that Trump did not lose the election. And here, there's significant overlap in each of these groups. Within the QAnon group, I would say virtually all of them believe Trump didn't lose the election. I can't really speak with much certainty on the others, but a good chunk of each of the other groups also, members, those groups probably are confident that Trump did not lose the election, that the election was rigged. And that's significant. And that itself, to be clear, is a conspiracy theory. And there's as many versions of how Trump didn't win the election and actually lost the election as there are individuals that believe it. So I offer sort of this thought example here. What if you believed with certainty that the presidential election was rigged? Moreover, that it was rigged and the other party won. And then also that the party that won includes Satan worshiping pedophiles. So this is part of the QAnon thing. I mean, you don't even have to answer that last one, but like, what if you honestly believe that the election was rigged and as a result of that, the other party won, that democracy was fundamentally undermined? What would you be willing to do? If you genuinely cared about democratic institutions, chances are you'd be willing to maybe take to the streets, protest. Maybe you'd go to the Capitol and riot. And that's what these people really believed. So I think it helps to understand the how profound this belief is for them and the implications of holding this belief earnestly. It's pretty serious. And when it takes on sort of biblical dimensions as well, you can see how it can put fire in people's belly to do some pretty intense stuff. It just occurred to me now that I left out a slide here. It shouldn't go without mention that since September 11th, the majority of those people killed by domestic terrorist events in the United States have been from right-wing groups. So when you compare right-wing extremists with left-wing extremists with religious jihadi types, like pro-Al-Qaeda, pro-ISIS groups, if you look at all that, you could also use the include incels in that. So these are involuntary and celibates, basically misogynists, some of whom have killed women. They're so anti-woman that they kill women. That among all these groups, the majority of the terrorist violence in terms of how many people have been killed have been from right-wing groups, and the majority of that set have been from white nationalist groups, so white supremacist groups. So moving forward, the concern is the circulation of these ideas, and there's not just overlap, right? But there's this cross-pollination. In QAnon, it's turning out to be something of a I just lost the word. A very like protean conspiracy theory that can morph and shift, and there's enough there for any group to sort of latch onto and become sort of part of that community. So there's something there for the anti-government groups. There's something there for the white nationalist groups. So there's this cross-pollination here, and they're all recruiting from one another, especially the more organized groups like the white nationalists and anti-government groups. Let me go back to the earlier slide there where I said, why do people believe so? And I want to focus on this palliative for existential anxiety and fulfillment of social needs. The palliative for existential anxiety, we need to appreciate that the concerns here from the anti-government groups, it's about government tyranny that is just around the bend. The concern for the white supremacist organizations, white nationalist groups, is that white culture and white race is going to be displaced and replaced. The existential anxiety for QAnon, it's a little bit harder to pin down, but you've probably seen the Save Our Children campaign. You might have seen this, which is the seemingly innocuous campaign. I mean, sounds great. Who doesn't want to save children? But this is a QAnon thing where you're saving children from national and international pedophilia rings. Like that's a crisis. And then also the existential crisis of having elections stolen, like the crisis of democracy. The social fulfillment here is also an angle that needs to be emphasized. So you have community building via conspiracy and hate, this existential fear, an us versus them mentality, where they are replacing us or they are illegitimately ruling over us, this specifically over concerns of white nationalism. And this is all being turbocharged in the social media ecosystem. And one of the consequences here is that you're going to see individuals that believe the stakes are so high that the only just remedy is through violence, through political violence, which includes terrorist violence. So you will see more incidents like the El Paso Walmart shooting, like the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh, because they are now an existential threat, literally. And I mean, my fear moving forward is that the QAnon overarching conspiracy theory will help keep the oxygen going for that conspiracy, even though Trump is out of office now. That will continue to go and that and grow, and the white supremacist groups and anti-government groups are going to find willing adherents there. And there's a lot of slippery slope logic to the recruitment and radicalization process. Day one, you're engaging with some jokey memes online, and before you know it, a couple months in, and you now believe that the white race is really being replaced, that Jewish organizations are helping orchestrate it, George Soros is controlling everything, and then all it takes is a few individuals that are willing to go to that next step and take up a gun or a bomb or a vehicle and commit acts of violence. In the terrorism literature, there's this popular understanding of history where terrorism has come in three waves. You have this anarchist wave in the late 19th century. This is like modern terrorism. Anarchist wave in the late 19th century, where individuals were finally thinking about using violence against tyrants, but also those that associate with tyrants, the capitalist class. This wave ebbs and we get this anti-colonial wave where political violence is used against colonial states to end colonialism. So South Africa, Algeria being prime examples. And then you get this sort of new left wave in the 60s and 70s. So this is like extreme left-wing groups. And then you get, did I say there's three? There's four. And then you get this Islamic fundamentalist wave in the 90s and onto the 2000s. And then now the question mark is there now going to be a sort of white nationalist wave? And we're seeing that white nationalism is indeed a transnational phenomena. It's not just a US phenomena, that there are similar currents in the UK and in Eastern Europe, France. And there is this cross-pollination between those organizations as well. So is this the future of terrorism? I fear in the short term that yes. Now, whether or not it will constitute a distinct wave by how many attacks we see. But I suspect for the United States, domestic terrorism, this will be the dominant picture for the next decade or so. So with that, I'll end it and see if there are any questions. Let me see if I can stop sharing here. My computer's slow to respond. There we go. I'm now seeing Christy's face. Hopefully I was not cut off that whole time just talking to an audience of one. One other thing I should say is that what motivated me to want to talk out loud about this stuff is I think about political violence and I teach a terrorism class. But B, on this campus and the surrounding area, there have been white nationalist propaganda stickers put up. So there's a group called Patriot Front, and there's a couple, there've been a couple stickers and posters that have been put up just off campus. So this is here in our community. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was a student, just because, I don't know, just because students tend to be paying attention to politics and whatnot more, but it's here. And how do we deal with it? I don't know. Okay, let me bring up the chat because I saw a question. For some reason, my program is pretty director has testified as much. That being said, I mean, they engage in political violence 100%. So like property violence, vandalism, but they don't engage in terrorist violence. And even the guy who claimed to be a member of Antifa who shot I think it was a member of the 3 Percenters, which is like a right-wing militia group. I think it was in Portland, shot and killed him. It's not an example of terrorism. It's an example of political violence gone horribly wrong in the middle of a highly charged protest. I mean, they're a concern from law enforcement perspective, but not in the same sense of terroristic violence, where innocent folks will be intentionally sought after to be killed to spread a political message. I think in the future, we probably will see an increase in left-wing terrorism. If I had to guess, it would be in response to climate change. Let me see. Really, Trump's rhetoric leading up to the storming of the country. Yeah, I think Trump's rhetoric definitely, I don't know about the conspiracy theory stuff too much. I don't know if his rhetoric fostered it. He didn't do anything to deflect it, that's for sure. And when QAnon was brought up to him, he was like, I don't know. I hear they like me. Sounds good. Like he didn't really say anything to suggest that the group should be ignored, which it should have been. But he definitely fostered the belief of some radical groups, for sure. I mean, there's a reason why white nationalist groups were happy that Trump got elected. And there are some white nationalist groups that are unhappy that Trump didn't do more. But yeah, he definitely inspired a lot of this. And we saw it in Charlottesville with the so-called Unite the Right rally, where Trump says, there's bad people on both sides, this sort of both sidisms or whataboutisms. He basically draws false equivalency between these groups and left-wing groups. Any parallels drawn between the recent election doubts and the 2004 elections? Activity in Ohio. I actually don't know about that. Lisa's question about the doubts in the 2004 election. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there was a congressional commission in 2005, and I have the book that's like the word by word. I volunteered with the Kerry campaign in 2004, so I was hearing a lot of this from that perspective. I've reflected back on that time. There was a lot of speculation about voting machines being shortchanged. There was speculation about Diebold voting machines not working correctly. And whenever the whole Dominion, question came about with this election, it made me kind of hark back to those times. So I just thought on the off chance you familiar with that, be able to comment.
Good. So I definitely remember the question about the Diebold machines. So these are the vote counting machines, about their reliability and their ability to be hacked. So yes, I mean, as far as that's concerned, there's definitely that parallel. And quite frankly, this is something that needs to be addressed, because it's going to be a perennial source of uncertainty. Like, can we trust these voting machines? I think there needs to be steps taken to make sure that this is not a question that can be raised, every 2 years. So we're trying to engage. So do you think it's worth? Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I want to go back. There was a question earlier on I wanted to make sure you saw. It was, do we know if these groups are financially supported by elites, or are they kind of self-funded?
I don't know. I suspect it's not. There's not much funding from elites. That's my suspicion. These tend to be more bottom-up campaigns, but I'm not confident on that. That's a good question. The QAnon stuff is really an emerging area of research. Not that many people know too much about it. Do you think it's worth engaging conspiracy theories online? So, I mean, here's where I think this is a good question for all of us to reflect on, because chances are someone that is interested in QAnon. Like I do. I know the people I care about they flirt with that world. And they happen to be in that space where they're also interested in white nationalist thinking. But for them, they don't see it as racism. They see it as, well, minorities have their rights and minorities have their space. Why can't whites have that as well? That's the logic. It's like, I don't hate them, but I want a little space for me too. And that's what they want, is a white ethno state. And it sounds, the language again, sort of, it hides the white supremacy that is actually being voiced there, even if the individual doesn't really appreciate what they're saying. But the point is, I think there are people in our lives that flirt with these ideas. And I think the research shows that if you come at them hard, that the walls go up and they're not going to be open to having that conversation. So it needs to be held, these conversations need to be held gingerly. You shouldn't be saying stuff like, how can you believe in this stupid stuff? Because they're just going to be defensive and they'll dig into their beliefs. So, I mean, it's strange to think, well, are you saying that we should engage with white nationalists? No, / depending on the situation, the forum, they shouldn't be given space in public fora. That's for sure. But I think in these more like human interactions, like one-on-one, these like small private interactions with people in our lives, I think there are opportunities there to reach out and to try to get understanding and have them understand your position. And if you can sort of find out what the first principles are that you both share, like the core values that you both share, and sort of build out from there, that's one strategy. And you can sort of build out, and then you can get them to kind of see where there's contradictions in their own belief system. And it's not going to be a moment where you show them like one really cool article from the Atlantic, and then all of a sudden the veil has fallen. They're like, oh my gosh, my eyes are open. It's going to be an incremental thing. I also think that like the college experience can be really positive for students that come from backgrounds where they're never exposed to any type of difference. You know, it's a small parochial world that they're coming from, and then all of a sudden they get exposed to diversity. And that can be life-changing, because all of a sudden, you know, you're hanging out with a person of color, and it turns out that they're the funniest, coolest person you've ever met. And before you know it, the beliefs that you once had are a distant memory. Having these types of forums also, I think, are important. Anyway, so I do think it's important to engage, but you're only going to get so far, depending on how you engage. The internet and social media regulations. I don't know. This is a slippery slope here, because when you want to regulate what type of speech can be had on the internet and social media, well, tomorrow it might be your speech that's being regulated, right? I think what we have seen is with Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, deplatforming the more extreme QAnon, white supremacist groups, the really hardcore Trump supporters that were proliferating the conspiracy that the election was rigged and stolen. That was great, because all of a sudden those people had no voice, and they were forced into like this dark corner where, yes, they still talk to each other and sort of fuel each other, but their ability to bring in new people was greatly diminished. And that's where the value was in deplatforming them. And then also some of the social networking sites that they went to some of them were just like garbage in terms of like, they just weren't well built, poor security. They didn't function well. Unlike Twitter, which is a really slick platform. So I don't know about regulations myself. I kind of feel uncomfortable about it, but I understand the concern for sure. But I think it's probably better if people vote with their feet. Like Facebook can be a pretty gnarly place. I don't know.
Well, and these are great questions. And just as a little appetizer here, and Julie will talk more about this in a minute, but we have 2 more sessions coming up that are going to dig into some of these questions more in depth. So Dr. Lauren Copeland will be digging into this idea of social media and the influence and ways that we can utilize that as a positive platform and the impact it's had in some of these areas. And Dr. Kelly Coble will be leading a conversation looking at this from a philosophical and ethical perspective, and also thinking a little more, Ellen, kind of along the lines of what you were asking of like, what can we do about this, right? So great questions, and hopefully we can continue to explore those in some depth. Other questions for Dr. Kyber? We still have a little time here.
If anybody's typing, let me just add that I should have maybe spent a little bit more time on this, but one of the things that makes social media especially ripe for spreading these pathologies is that it is susceptible to misinformation and disinformation, so the intentional wrong information. And then it allows people, Stephen Colbert said it, I don't know, over a decade ago now in his character on the Colbert Show, like truthiness. It allows people to cobble together their own truths, and it rings true to them, and they can insulate themselves from factual information. And then it just becomes, especially pernicious when it involves these really high stakes conspiracies and white supremacy, misogyny, anti-Semitism. It's a very bad combination.
And just to circle back, I think, really the point that you've made about how easy it is to go from just looking at a simple meme to all of a sudden, down the road, you're engaged in these acts of violence and things. And I think how we look at that on our campus and the role that we play within our own campus community, within our curriculum, looking at things like information literacy and media literacy, things like that? Are we teaching skills to be able to decipher what you're seeing and where it's coming from? Things like that I think are so important.
Yeah, I think the media literacy stuff has become extraordinarily important. Also, just like Civics 101, like for everybody that was at that rally on January 6th, they didn't understand how government works. They thought it was an acceptable measure that like Pence at the last second would say like, I'm not going to count the ballots, and that would be constitutional. There's all sorts of stuff that they believe that the government could do legitimately that the government just couldn't do, that it would be tantamount to a constitutional crisis, but they just didn't understand. Can I clarify what you're saying about who are victims of violent acts? So it runs the spectrum depending on what the group is. So, white supremacist attacks will target Jewish people and people of color, immigrants, Black Americans, like the Black parishioners. Anti-government groups, they tend to target government officials, so police or military types. And then the incels, the so-called involuntary celibates, target their violence and rage on women.
Any final questions as we wrap up today? I'll kick it over to Julie.
Let me go ahead and say thanks to everybody while Julie's getting her mic running. Thanks everybody for showing up. Apologize about my voice. And yeah, I look forward to seeing the next presenters.
I think Julie's coming over to tell me her mic's not working. Hold on one second. Here, she'll come in my office and jump on here. No? Okay, we'll wrap up here.
So I apologize. I was supposed to close things out and I had a slide to show you the next presentations, but my computer's frozen. So just want to say thank you for everyone who attended, and thank you to Dr. Keiber for a very important, enlightening, and frightening presentation. I definitely appreciate you sharing your expertise with all of us, and I look forward to our upcoming presentations to learn more as well. Anything else you would like to add? I also left my script in the other rooms. So, thanks again, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Kyber. We appreciate you starting this conversation and sharing all this good info.
All right, thanks all.
Thank goodness we were in the same space.
Yeah.